Bookaholics is a safe place for reading junkies who obsess over books, authors, bookstores, book news, and book trivia. We'll nerd out with book reviews, author interviews, our habit, and other bookish things. Here is your host, Deirdre Pippins.
Good morning, Alice, and welcome to the Bookaholic podcast.
Thank you so much for asking me. It's lovely to see you. And it's actually late afternoon here in London, but happy morning to you.
That's right. I forgot about our time.
No, not a problem.
Well, I'm glad to have you. Well, let's go ahead and dive right in. You know, when I spoke with you on the pre-call, we unveiled so many, wide and varied things about you, but I'm going to try to stay on task. And I'm going to reveal something to you today that you did not know the other day. And so in your writings, you write Jane Austen. That's one of the things that you are noted for. So first of all, let me tell you this. I've never read Jane Austen, not even in school and not even for pleasure. However, I know that her writings are hugely popular in lots of different circles. They revive themselves and they come back as movies. So we're going to talk quite a bit about Jane Austen and your path to writing Jane Austen-esque. First of all, let's start with a primer of Jane Austen and tell the people, because there's a lot of young people out here that do follow me, and maybe they read Jane Austen in school, maybe they've seen one of the recent Hollywood movies that were made from her books, but sometimes watching the movie is not the same as reading the book. So give us a primer on who Jane Austen was.
Jane Austen was a very poor and not well-regarded daughter of a minister in Regency England. She was poor in that she had no dowry. So the only way she was going to make herself at all well off was by marrying. That was what happened in those days. And that's a really important part of her books. And that's what some people really object to. You get people say, oh God, don't read Jane Austen. It's all about people just hitching up. And it's not anything else beyond that. In fact, where her genius lay was not just in the fact that she was born in a period where people had to marry or basically die, because they were just on the charity of relations. So it really was life or death. But much more importantly, she delved into human nature in such a way that even her most modest characters, even her least important characters, have this kind of charm or wit or something really clever about them. And so that's why she has this appeal to so many generations. But I also feel that she was a feminist in herself, because although she herself never married, she was engaged for one night. For one night she was engaged to a guy who asked her to marry him, and I believe she accepted him because she thought otherwise she would be destitute, because she did not come from a rich family. So they were expected to marry. But she had this night, this dark night of the soul, and said to herself, no, I'm not going to sacrifice myself for this. If I have to be poor the rest of my life, if I have to be on dependent on my relations for the rest of my life, that's fine. I'm not going to sell out that way. And I think this comes through in the novels as well. I think her heroines are actually prototype feminists.
Wow. Okay. So, that's good to know, because I will tell you, I had some image of Jane Austen, just like the characters that the Hollywood screens portray, people in beautiful finery, silks and gowns and all of these things, going to parties and socialites of that era. I had that as that was Jane Austen, and that was her life, and that's who she was. But she just simply wrote of those type of people.
I think that was box office. I mean, she was so successful in her time that the Prince Regent, whom she hated, said, "You must dedicate your next novel to me." So she did, rather sarcastically. But the point is, she had no time for hypocrites. She had no time for the nobility. She was interested in human nature. She was interested in women specifically, and in women's empowerment, I believe. And
Wow.
I think that all of this stuff that Hollywood does, well, it sells, doesn't it? The beautiful gowns sell. But in actual fact, if you read the books, most of our heroines couldn't have afforded those kind of gowns.
Got you.
You know,
Now, refresh my memory, refresh my mind of some of the titles of the books and who the heroines are of the Jane Austen book.
right. Her most famous book is Pride and Prejudice, and I'm
Yeah.
currently writing a book that's based on that. That is the famous book with Darcy, the tall, dark, handsome, unapproachable hero, whom the heroine, Elizabeth Bennet, hates, and then gradually grows to love. So it's a pure romance. It's her lightest book. It's one of her shortest books, and I would recommend anyone to start with that because it's very approachable. Then the
Mhm.
second one is Sense and Sensibility. And that one
Yes.
is about two sisters who are completely different. Eleanor is very straight laced and extremely prudish. And her younger sister is impulsive, falls in love in a heartbeat, and is always getting ticked off, always getting reproached by Eleanor for being so impulsive and out there and kind of she's lovely, Marianne. So you got the contrast between Eleanor and Marianne. That's probably the second most appealing book by
Mhm.
Jane Austen. The third most would be the sort of mystery of Northanger Abbey, which is where you've got a very naive heroine falling in love with a very astute and clever hero. And they're getting basically mucked about by their relations. But that's also a really lively one to get into. The other ones are harder, but
Okay.
I would recommend Pride and Prejudice first of all because it never fails, and and it's also a romance, which the others basically aren't. It's more, as I said, there's a feminist perspective, there's a social perspective, and there's all kinds of interweaving characters. So they're not pure romance. There is romance in them, but they're not romance. You see.
Well, see, and that's probably what you're just saying, is probably what kept me from approaching Jane Austen novels is I thought that they were possibly sappy romances. And I am not romance is possibly one of my last genres that I read. I can count the number of romance novels that I've read on my fingers and toes. So yeah, so that's probably why I never approached it. It was more palatable for me to maybe glean the historical period on a movie as opposed to going into a book. I just haven't all of reading about these sappy and virginal type of romances that's not based in reality. So that's where I probably got that from. And I would hear, and maybe some of the people that I would hear talk about that, like Mr. Darcy and all this.
Yes.
I was like, that's not, that's not
Yes,
me.
no, it's not me either, to be honest. It really isn't. I'm much more interested in the perspective, the social perspective, and how these women had no other choice, as Jane Austen herself had no other choice, but she
Yeah.
made it. She had the guts after having been approached by a man, very eligible, but she wasn't in love with him. She accepted him because that was kind of her duty. And then she thought, what am I doing? What am I doing? And she
Right.
thought twice. And that long night of the soul I referred to, and it was one night. And in the morning, she said, "No, I made a mistake. I'm very sorry." And this to me shows her integrity. And
Yeah.
it also shows that it also shows is that someone of that intelligence and that genius still felt compelled on first glance to say yes. And then
Right.
she thought, no, that's mad. I can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how interesting is that? You
I
see?
think we've all been subject to change our mind on
Yes,
on
yes,
certain things
definitely.
from time to time. So I won't hold that against her. So was she, a lot of times when you study these various legendary people in our history, and they're artists or writers, and you're so surprised that we love their writings and stuff today. And then when you're studying them, you find out during their era, they were extremely poor, or their music or artistry or writings were disregarded by the society at that time, and they died poor. And broke Van Gogh and some of your classical music people, they would die poor, and, like, how in the world? So tell us the fate of Jane Austen. She never married, you said, but was she rich and famous during her era?
For a single woman, she was rich and famous, but
Wow.
that means that is still in that's very small sphere. In other words, she made some money during her lifetime and was well enough regarded that, as I say, the Prince Regent insisted that she dedicate Emma to him, which she did sarcastically. But the point is that no, she was still poor in relative terms. She would have been much richer had she accepted the offer and stuck with it of the person who wanted to marry her. And one of the things which we use through the writings is the lack of choice that women had. So in other words, if you were an educated woman like you or me, you would have had two choices, really. You would have either been dependent on your family, or you would have married above so that your husband would look after you. The only other choice, and she writes very horribly about it in her books, I don't know if it was quite as awful as she made out, was to be a governess, was to go and work as a governess. She compared it to slavery, which I think over the top. But I think slavery would have been way, way worse. But the point is, for a woman of her era, it was regarded as a kind of slavery to be subject to that kind of usage. And to have your intellect sort of sold in that kind of way. So yes, women had very few options. And that's why I think the way in which they dealt with their options is so interesting. Right. Not only her heroines and not only Jane herself, but the heroines that I've used. For example, in my book, Harriet, a Jane Austen variation, Harriet is this little pathetic girl, and she's of no parentage at all. And she's been put in a boarding school by somebody, nobody knows who. And Emma, rich heiress, just thinks she's rather attractive. Oh, she'd like a little project. So she'll stick her under her wing and get her properly married to some gentleman. And that's what happens in Jane Austen's book, Emma. But in my book, Harriet goes, I need to marry a gentleman. I've got to get under Emma Woodhouse's wing. I've got to get her to notice me. I've got to get her to become my mentor. So in other words, I've altered her character into something that's more forthcoming, something a little more proactive, a little less Regency, a little more modern. And I think this kind of thing, went on a lot more often than people think, because women, let's face it, women are smart. Women are not going to sit here and think, oh my God, I have to wait for somebody to notice me. They may never notice me. They're going to go out there and do something.
Yes.
And that's what Harriet did.
Yes.
So in other words, I think Jane Austen would have sympathized with this. People say, oh, how dare you alter one of her characters? I haven't altered the others, but I have altered Harriet. But what I feel is that probably all over England at the time, there were pretty young girls thinking, I deserve better than this. What can I do about it? That's what gets, and we just don't know about it.
Right. Exactly. Well, now, so tell us about your other book that's Jane Austen-esque. It is, let's see, let me pull it down.
It's called Susan, a Jane Austen prequel. This is completely original because nobody much cares about Jane Austen's Lady Susan because she was wicked. She was terrible. Oh, she was shocking. She was 35 years old. I mean, imagine it, 35. And she was still dared to be beautiful, still dared to be flirtatious. And she really was pretty wicked, I have to say, because she had affairs sort of for fun. And this was considered unbelievably shocking at the time. That Jane Austen, at the age of 18, wrote a book about a woman who had affairs for fun with married men. This was just unbelievably shocking. So anyway, this is one of her first books. She didn't publish it till later, but she did. And the point is that this book was about this wicked widow who couldn't keep her hands off the men. And I thought, she's interesting, but a little too wicked at 35. What would she have been like at 16? And I think at 16, I don't believe anybody is wicked at 16. I think she was corrupted by the morality of London. And I think that at 16, she was a little manipulative and knew how to use her sexuality. but she was not wicked. So I wrote
Right.
about her when she was young and pretty and manipulative, but not wicked, and 16.
Well, to say this, it's always the woman's fault.
Yes,
It's always the woman's fault. And she's 35 and she's wicked and she's just having affairs with all these married men. But all these married men, nobody tells
well, they must take the blame. They must share the blame. And Jane Austen actually says that in Mansfield Park. She says it is the blame is not equally shared in our era, as we know. And that was true. So in other words, the women got blasted. They got their careers were ruined. They were sent away into the country and never heard of again. And the men would just move on to the next woman. And Jane Austen was so aware of that.
Yeah, and that's still going on till today.
I agree.
Everybody always blames the woman.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna give you, this doesn't have anything to do with morality per se, but with the Will Smith slapping.
Yes.
Will Smith, a grown man, got up out of his chair and he went up on stage and he
I watched it. I was there.
But everybody said, had it not been for Jada and the way she looked at him, it's always the woman's fault.
I feel for her. I really do, because he was so out of order. He has admitted it afterwards, of course.
Yes.
He has admitted it. And I do give him credit for that. But I've really been so shocked on anything I've ever seen on live TV in my entire life. And you're right. People tend to give men a little bit of a free ride.
Yeah, they do.
And this was even more the case in Jane Austen's time. In other words, what happened was Mansfield Park. I don't want to bore you with the whole story, but in Mansfield Park, there was a very shocking for Jane Austen situation where the young lady married, despite being in love with the young man who didn't ask her to marry him. She married a rich guy, and then she met up with the young man later and ran off with him. She basically, as a married woman, she ran off with him. And so what happened was she wound up sent to a foreign country in a cottage and was never heard or seen of again. And he returned to society, and people, they gave him a bit of a wide berth at first, but after that, he was absolutely fine. And this, and this is what Jane Austen was saying in this famous comment when she says, the society does not treat the two sexes as equally as one might hope, was her exact phrase.
Right.
So I agree with you completely.
Well, now let me dive into how did you, even though, like you just agreed with me a few minutes ago about the romances and all of these things, how did you get drawn into writing the Jane Austen-esque novel?
I think it was Lady Susan, really, simply because I found her character so interesting. As I say, she's reckoned to be the biggest villainess in all of Jane Austen's writing, and people say she's one-dimensional. And they also say, I haven't told you the whole story about her. She was really wicked and that she had this affair for fun. But she also tried to make her young and innocent daughter marry a man she hated. So that's also pretty bad. She is not a good woman. And I just thought, when did she become like that? Would she have really been like that when she was young? And I think I have Jane Austen's own word, because in one of her novels, I think Abby, she goes on about how London is a corrupting force and how society corrupts young people. And I just imagined that as having happened to Susan when she was young. And that turned her into this man-eating, manipulative person who was willing to sacrifice her daughter for ambition, her beautiful daughter, and to try to force her to marry a man that the daughter cannot bear. So in other words, I was really interested in that character. And so then I thought, well, nobody's done it. Everybody's written about Pride and Prejudice. Nobody's written about Lady Susan. And I wanted
Now that's very interesting, because Lady Susan, I'm totally attracted to, and I'm like, I've got to read that.
That's really interesting, because I felt the same way.
Yes. Well, what do you think Jane Austen would have felt about Bridgerton and the success of that?
I think she would have been quite ironic about it. I think Bridgerton is a triumph in many ways. I have so many friends who love it, and they go, "Oh, you'll be the next Bridgerton." I go, "Oh God, save me from that." But I mean, basically what it is it's kind of, we were talking about romance. It's kind of romancified Austen, or Georgette Heyer, who's another fantastic writer of this period. And I don't really get on with it myself, but I just think it's in its own way perfect. It's in its own way perfect. They've done it so well. And I just think, you have to take your hat off, really. It's been a massive success for a reason.
Yeah.
And although, I prefer it if they hadn't kind of, anyway, no, I'm not going to go into all the stuff that bothers people who really care about this sort of period, but I just feel, good luck to them. I'm not going to sit here and criticize anybody. Same thing with Bridgerton. Sanditon. Sanditon's the same thing. Sanditon was Jane Austen's unfinished novel. She sadly died before she finished it. So what Hollywood has done is they take in that little teeny bit and they just go mad with it. And what I love about it is the multiracial casting. And some people hate that, but I love it because it's giving hands. And the Royal Shakespeare Company does nothing but multiracial casting. And I mean, people just have to build a bridge and get over it, because you get such great actors that way,
You really do.
It bothers people because it wasn't true to period. Well, it wasn't true to period. In that time, they were all white people. Well, we can build a bridge and get over that now, can't we?
Right.
You see what I mean? So in that way, I think it's a triumph. And I think some of the acting is amazing. But I do think Jane Austen will be going, "This was my Sanditon. Oh my God, what have they done to it?" And I think they put in too much romance and not enough humor is what would bother me. Got you. She'd be thrilled with the casting. I think most of the casting she'd be thrilled with. But I think there's not enough humor and satire, and there's too much romance.
Yes. Well, as you say about the multiracial casting, it's just kind of like Hamilton. And when I first heard about Hamilton, I was like, how in the world are they going to bridge, what happened in America in the 1700s with the, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson? How is that going to turn into multiracial casting and hip hop? But it works.
It works. I honestly think it is a work of genius.
Yes, it is. It was a work of genius, and it's a total reimagining.
Yeah, if somebody has that good an idea, it's like I heard Andrew Lloyd Webber being interviewed about cats the other day. He said everybody said you couldn't write a musical about a bunch of poems about cats by T.S. Bleeding Eliot, and it's a work of genius. This is another one, and you just got to take your hat off and say, "What imagination!"
Right. You just have to push the envelope, to use an old business phrase. You just really do, and that's just the cliff of creativity. And are you willing to jump off of it?
Exactly.
Yes.
But you also have to have backers willing to jump off it with you for musicals, and I think that is the real genius. Is that you say, well, I mean, Lloyd Webber. I mean, they would probably, if Lloyd Webber took the telephone directory, not that we have them anymore, and did a musical on it, he would probably get some backing. But
yes, most definitely. I think so. Yeah. Well, now you also write under a pen name, Spaulding Taylor. Now, why do you elect to choose some books you write under Spaulding Taylor versus Alice McVeigh?
I have had a weird writing career because most of my life, I've been a professional cello player, which is why I'm so keen on music. But I was lucky enough in my 30s, when I had a sort of breakdown, I was infertile, I went back to my writing. I was incredibly lucky, and I got picked up by a big 5 publisher, Orion. And I had 2 contemporary novels published by Orion as Alice McVeigh. So then when my next bit of creativity kicked in terms of writing, not cello, I thought, my readers aren't going to like this much because it's not very literary. It's sci-fi. It's dystopian. There's a lot of swearing in it. There's sex in it. And I just thought I needed to keep those readers separate. Yeah. So I use my 2 middle names. My actual name is Alice Taylor, and how could be more boring than that? So I'm Alice Spaulding Taylor McVeigh. And so I use my 2 middle names as my dystopian fiction name, just so people wouldn't get offended. And then I thought the people who love my literary fiction that I wrote for the Big Five publisher would still like the Jane Austen fiction, so I get the same name on that. That's fine.
Very smart. I think that's very clever. But then I'm trying to figure out, how is it that you balance out your creative brain to write dystopian on one hand and Jane Austen-esque on another? That seems to be quite a creative cliff, as I'm saying.
It's not only a creative cliff, it's a really dumb move. You say I was clever. I actually think I was incredibly stupid. And people often say on Facebook, they ask you advice or they write to you. I get people writing to me, oh, how do you manage so wonderfully with two writing names? And I just go, I wish I'd never done it because it's so hard. It's so hard to keep up two personas. It's so hard to keep up two newsletters. It's so hard to do all this stuff twice. And I just go, why did I do it? Anyway, Aidan came to me in a dream, a kind of vision. I was meditating as part of an energy healing, long story, part of a breakdown. And Aidan came to me and he insisted upon my writing him. So I had to write him. And I was very fortunate in finding Unbound UK as a publisher. It's not easy to suddenly get out of the blue publishing a different genre. But anyway, I had to write it. But I knew I would offend people because of the language, because of the sexual scenes. And I just knew I couldn't use the same name. So, I wouldn't recommend it. In fact, my recommendation people often ask this to new writers are pick a genre and stick to it. Pick a name, stick to it. Make life easy. It's hard enough. It's hard enough to have your own life as a real person. And you know this because you're a writer and an editor and everything else. It's hard enough to do that without having to do it twice over and then to also have your personal life.
Right. Most definitely. And I've talked to so many authors and a lot of them have a path. They don't write under a pen name, but they have a path where they write a little something here and a little something there. And I have yet for someone to give me a complete answer about, I just feel like you can't be everything to all people. And so I love your answer that you answered it completely to tell new writers or burgeoning writers, stick to one genre.
I really do. I really do. You don't make a whole lot of money to the second book or the third book. And so, you got to regard the first book as a kind of loss leader and then put yourself into the whole thing and believe in it. And I think I sort of haven't done that, but that's partly because I'm confused by being a musician as well. So, so I haven't had an ideal career, and things would have been a lot easier for me if I'd known what I know now. But I'm just pleased with where I am at the moment. I'm pleased with where I feel about my writing, and I feel good about it. And I think that in a weird sort of way, finding yourself when you're older is it's almost like a new release. It's almost like a new you. Yes. And I had such a hard time in my middle age, my early middle age. I'm not going to bore you with that, but it is, I had such a hard time that I just feel now as if somebody's pressed a spring and I feel I can do whatever I need to do.
Yes. I'm right there with you, Alice, on a lot of different levels. I just feel like you said, I feel like a brand new me. I'm having some of the best time of my life right now, and I'm just so thankful and grateful for it. I love my kids, but they're grown up now, and and forgive me, I don't want anybody to misinterpret what I'm saying, but all that drudgery of motherhood, going to pick up kids at school, dropping them off early in the morning.
I do not miss it.
I'm glad you did jump in it.
I do think for those of you who might be listening to this who are younger than I am, really and truly the best is yet to come. Because I love my kid, and I waited so long for my kid. But I do not miss that drudgery.
No, I do not either. And I'm like you saying, I love my sons. I love my sons to the ends of the earth. I know you love your daughter to the end of the earth, but just glad to be rid of that. Just that every day.
You feel free to really
expectations and judgments of being a young mother.
I agree. I felt terribly oppressed because I was mostly traveling around the world with my cello and leaving her with my husband and feeling awful. I'd sit here, I'd do all this cooking before I left. I'd be sitting here frantically worrying about what was going to happen. What wasn't. I mean, you don't need that kind of stress in your life when you're trying to be creative.
Right, right. Yes, most definitely, most definitely. Well, you've also, you're such a wide and varied person. You've also done ghostwriting. Now, do you do ghostwriting anymore?
I don't. I did ghostwriting when my daughter was very young because I didn't want to tour with my cello. So I
Right.
thought, what can I do? My then agent, she's an amazing agent. I don't have her
Mhm.
anymore though. And she said, I'll recommend you to a few people. And I got some really lovely projects, mostly assisting famous people with their autobiographies.
Yes. Yeah.
And so what you do as ghostwriter, and this is really fascinating, and in a way, in the end, I found it diminished me. In the end, I got quite
Mm.
depressed about it. What you do is you take your own creativity, you completely sublimate it, you take on someone else's voice, you almost take on their life,
Yeah.
and you sublimate yourself. You wind up feeling, the word ghost is right, you begin feeling as if you are a ghost of who you are. And it
Mhm.
took me a long time to get out of that mentality. When I'd
Mhm.
given it up, when I'd have said, no, this is defeating me. I know I'm good at
Right.
it. I keep getting these offers and I don't want to go down that path. So I took a big
Right.
risk and I just thought, no, I'm going to get in and out. I'm going to get out from under this before it completely takes over. But I am good at it. For some reason,
Yeah.
I'm kind of chameleon-like. I can take on someone else. People say I write like Jane Austen. I think that's an absolute insult to Jane Austen. But I'm supposed to write like Jane Austen. And I think
Right.
that's part of this chameleon-like character, which made me a good ghostwriter. And I also feel very empathetic to other people. So I find it's very easy for me to relate to that. I wrote a book which is yet to find a publisher, a really, really wonderful book by this guy who was determined to swim the channel. Only about 1,500 people have swum the English Channel. And he
Yeah.
was fat, he was overweight, he was an alcoholic, and he bloody well swam it on his fifth attempt. And this whole book is just fantastic. And yet it still hasn't got a publisher. But I felt so deeply involved in his struggle that I was physically ill when he was trying to swim the channel all 5 times.
Oh my God. Now this
So
is
involved
something.
with this guy. I was so involved with his struggle. And I just find that it is a good way. It is a good way to be as a ghostwriter. It's not a good way to be as a person. And I
Yeah.
had from
Yeah.
him.
Wow. Wow. That's something else. I can see how maybe helping someone ghostwrite maybe a how-to book might not be as
Oh
involved
no,
as
absolutely not.
in
No,
writing
that's
a
fine. Yeah.
autobiography or
But
memoir.
the money is an autobiography. Well, it's harder. It's harder to find somebody who can get under the skin of a person and help them to express themselves. It is a rarer talent, and I'm not bragging. It's just a rarer talent.
Oh yes, that's
But anyway,
definitely
I'm not doing it anymore. No.
right, right. Now, what I'm curious also is about you have had you've been published by one of the big five publishers, Orion.
Yeah, but they dumped me.
Oh no! Oh
Yeah, no,
no!
they told me, yeah. I mean, this is part of my journey. I was picked up when I was really young. I mean,
Yeah.
I was playing cello, and I got really disappointed with where my career was going on the cello. I always wanted to be a principal cellist, and I wasn't. I was just playing in the BBC Symphony. I was just playing the Royal Philharmonic. I was number 10 cello. I was number 9 cello. Anyway, I wasn't where I wanted to be. So I thought, I'll go back to writing. So I went back to the best novel I'd written when I was younger, and I sent it off just to see what happened. And the third agent who I sent it to said, yes, I want you. And then I had a 2-book contract with Orion Hackett. I just could not believe my luck.
That
But
was
then what happened was I got so depressed after the first 2 novels did really well. But I got so depressed about my infertility. I was on my 6th IVF treatment that I couldn't write the 3rd. I failed. And my agent dumped me, and my publisher dumped me, and I was just I didn't have a child, I didn't have a career. I'd more or less written off. I hadn't written off, but I'd sort of written off my cello play, and I got nothing. I had nothing at that point. And then the 7th IVF worked, and I got my daughter, and so that changed everything. And I
yeah,
thought, right, I'm going to ghostwrite for my daughter so I could be there for her. I'm not going to
yeah.
go to her. And everything got better.
Wow, the trials of life, but we somehow stumble around until we find our place, right?
Yes, well, I certainly stumbled around.
Gosh. Well, now, how do you publish now? Do you self-publish?
I actually got several offers for my Jane Austen-esque series, and I turned them all
Oh,
down.
oh,
None of them was from a big five publisher, I have to say. If I got a big
uh-huh.
five publisher, I think I would have said yes, though it's not as good as it used to be. When I was with them 20 years ago, they did all the marketing for you. Now I've got friends with big five publishers, and you've got to do a lot of work. You've got to
Wow.
do so much social media. You've got to put yourself at their disposal. You've got to do all these signings. You've got to do everything. Anyway, things have got harder, but it's still easier if you've got big five on the side. But I
Yeah.
don't. The offers I got were from medium-sized publishers, and the advances were small. And in the
Mhm.
end, what I did, which I would recommend again to anyone listening who's thinking about it, the Society of Authors is fantastic. I
Mm.
approached them with the contracts I've been offered. I said, "What should I do?" I said, "Are these contracts something I should accept? Are they just not good enough?" And they looked at my career. They looked at where I was. And they said, "Don't accept them." They said these medium-sized publishers will not do enough for you to earn their royalties. You'll do
Okay.
better on your own. And I think I
Okay.
have, though I can't prove it. But
Wow.
that is a decision I came to. It was a very hard decision because I love the idea of having someone on side. I love the idea of having someone I can ring up. I loved having a big five publisher before they dumped me.
Right.
But
Right.
that was
Right.
it. That was then, and this is now. So
Right.
even now, they're not as good as they were because you've got to really devote yourself to selling.
Yes, yeah. I often tell people, and this is one of the things that I've learned while doing this podcast, is that you will read the New York Times bestseller list on Sunday or go online and see it or whatever have you, what they proclaim. And a lot of it is authors that they just have that marketing behind them.
Yeah.
It's always your James Patterson. It's always your Danielle
Well,
Steel.
he's a very good writer, but you're right. Yes.
Always, they're
Yes.
always on there,
Yeah.
but they have, it's kind of like every time either one of them writes a book, it's going to sell. Um, I remember reading the
Well,
very first
that's why
thing.
I would have accepted a big five if I'd been offered it. Because yes, it does take a lot of the stress out of it, but it takes other things out of it as well. My second novel, Ghost Music, I've just reissued my first one. If anyone's interested, it's on my website. My first contemporary novel, but the second novel, they had the most fantastic cover for the hardcover, and I just love the cover. It was a cover of this cellist, a
Mhm,
beautiful cellist in front of a Greek backdrop
mhm.
at moonlight. I just adored it. That to me summed up what Ghost Music was about. Anyway, for the paperback, they had a really terrible cover, and I said, "Can we just use the same cover? Would that be okay?
Right.
It would sell so much better." And they said, "You don't know anything about covers. We decide. Just go away." And the great thing about being a self-publisher is if you commission a cover and it's not what I'm sorry, it's not good enough. Try again. You go. You are in
Mhm,
control. The same way
mhm,
you're in control
mhm.
about where you advertise, how much you advertise, which podcasts you choose to appear upon, like
Yeah,
yours, and you just got complete autonomy. And yes, it is a hard, steep learning curve,
yeah.
but it's
Yes.
definitely working for me. And I think the Society of Authors was brilliant in telling me not to accept a medium size
Right.
publisher at this stage of my life. If I was younger, they might have said different. I don't know.
Wow.
There you go.
Well, even though you've given us this advice throughout the interview,
Yeah.
what one thing would you tell a new writer, somebody that's just coming out of the gate with their first book? What would you tell them?
They've already written it.
Oh.
I mean, you're saying they've already written it, or they're thinking
Yeah,
about it.
well, yeah, and they've already written it and they want to let it go and
I was going to say, if they haven't written it, and you and I would hate this advice, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because this is not for
yeah,
you. I would
right.
say write romance because it's easier to sell. Okay? But I can't write romance, and you're not keen on it, so I'm going to forget you heard that. Okay, so
Okay.
basically,
Yeah.
what I would say is, I would say two things. One, I would say research like crazy. the kind of book that you want to write. Don't just write a book that appeals to you,
Mhm.
because even if it's completely brilliant, it may be unsaleable. That happened to a friend of mine who I won't name, a fantastic writer. She's won amazing awards. But basically, she wrote the book that she was driven to write. And a lot of people believe this is a good idea, but I don't. I think, the heartbreak of writing the book you're driven to write that nobody wants is just something nobody can deal with. So I would say research what you're going to do. But the other thing, and I know everybody says this, but it's true, is so many people think, right, I'm going to write. I want to express myself. Well, that's
Right.
wonderful. But how much have you read?
Right.
I mean, I
Correct.
just think you've got to be a completely manic reader, at least in the area that you're really keen on. You've really got to know what's out there, what sells, what works, what people are looking for, and before you actually put pen to paper, you should really have a pretty good idea on that. So
Yes.
that's what I would say. I know it's
Well,
boring advice and everybody says it.
Well, it's kind of like everything else. A lot of times, whether people are going into business for themselves or writing a book or whatever,
Yeah.
and then they are so involved in the creativity process, they forget about the accounting, the human resources, the promotions. They forget about all the business side to get your new business or your new book out there. And then that's where they kind of,
That is so true, Deirdre. You're so right. And the other thing is that I would say I knew all about this because I'd already been published Big Five. But
Mhm.
the number of people who write the book and put it out there and just wait for the world to find it, postpone your book, take 6 months to get your marketing plan in place. Then, when you've really got the launch aced, you'll
Right.
feel really good when it comes out. And with any
Yeah.
luck, I mean, everybody ought to be able to be number one in a few categories.
Right.
They may not be the biggest categories, but everybody can do it if they really, really are astute marketing.
Yes. Yes.
They can.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Most definitely. And not to focus on awards or anything like that, but you are an award-winning writer.
Well, I wonder if I would be if I got a Big Five publisher. The thing is, basically I'm good enough to be with a Big Five publisher, but I'm not. So I've been
Right.
incredibly lucky picking up awards with indie publishing because I
Mhm.
should probably be with a Big Five publisher. So I think I've just been a bit lucky.
Yes. Well, I will say maybe not just lucky. I'm saying maybe good and very
Really. You're
creative.
very, very kind.
Uh,
I
because like I was talking about a little bit earlier, you go back to everything, and you got all these writers that's on the New York Times bestseller list, but there are some fine, fine writers out there that are independently published and are with medium-sized publishers. There's a lot of fine books that get ignored
It's very true.
or looked over just because they're not on the New York Times bestseller list or in the front of the Books a Million bookstore when you open the door.
And
So
I also do think that some of those are down to what I said before, though, which is people writing what their dream is and not
yes,
researching. And so many people I know are brilliant writers, but they cross genres. If you cross genres, it's like death on wheels, really, because how do you market it? Even a Big Five publisher will pull their hair out in clumps. They can't market it, and you're not going to do better than they will. So,
right,
I would say, don't write your dream, but live
right.
your dream instead.
Yes,
You know?
yes. Very good, very nice. I like that.
Thank you.
Well, Alice, I want to thank you so much
No, it's
for
been an absolute
the
pleasure.
Bookaholic podcast. 6 hours into the future.
Don't wish your life away. You're too young to wish your life away. Anyway, no, it's been an absolute pleasure and a joy. I knew it would be as soon as we spoke before. So I've been really looking forward to it. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Alice. And we will certainly have all your contact information, your website, your social media contacts in the podcast show notes, as well as the YouTube description box. Once again, Alice McVeigh, Miss Jane Austen-esque writer, thank you for joining the
Really
Bookaholic
kind.
podcast.
Really, really kind. Take care.
Thank you.